The legendary creator of 60 Minutes, Don Hewitt, summed up the mission of the broadcast in 4 simple words: tell me a story. My name is Nicole Young, and that's what I do, tell stories. I've had the chance for the last 11 years to travel the world in search of all of these stories, and I've realized that I've joined this elite group of people called journalists, and they're crazy. They're the kinds of people who, when bombs go off, we run after them. When danger happens, we pick up the phone and book a flight. We're the ones when people say, really, you're going where there's a nuclear disaster? We say, sure, yeah, why not? Because that's what we do. We try and find the stories within all of this chaos because we realize that the mission of a journalist is to look under the rock, is to find where there are people who are not being heard. And we realize that we have to go even further than other people would, normal people would. People who sit at a desk every day, people who do all of those things. So as a journalist, I try and find a way to give people that voice. It's a mission that we all have. And every once in a while, we sometimes do it well. There are a few stories that I want to share with you today that help sum up the mission that I have had in trying to give people a voice. And one that really I'm going to share with you first is about covering the Great Recession in Central Florida in 2011, when I was just astonished to find how many people were living in poverty in America. And so I flew back and forth to the happiest place on earth, which was Disney World, and I found that there were families and children living in motels across the street from Disney World. Who knew? And I then linked up with a woman who is a homeless liaison, because we have those in America, homeless liaisons. She's a woman who basically helps underprivileged children in her school district who are classified as homeless. And so she would knock on doors and go under bridges and go to motel rooms and go to cars. And I found her finding families living in the corners of America, in places that you would never believe. And you thought, really? That's just absurd. It's the richest country in the world, isn't it? And so I would speak to all of these families. And over the course of the year, I spoke to hundreds of families, hundreds of children. And I realized the children didn't have as much of a voice as their parents did. Their parents always answered for them. Their parents always said, well, she feels tired, or she feels hungry, or she gets really sad in school. And I thought, you know what, I don't want to hear from the parents. I want to hear from the kids. And not only do I want to hear from the kids, I want them to tell me what it feels like to be hungry in America. What does it feel like? What does hunger feel like in America? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? And so I gathered a group of kids together, with the permission of their parents, of course, and I brought them to the school where I had met them, the school district, and I piled them all into a classroom cafeteria, and they sat on tables, and I convinced them to talk to the correspondent I work with, and here's a little bit of what they had to share with us, and this is their voice on what hunger feels like in America.
In Seminole County schools, 1,000 students have recently lost their homes.
How many of you in the last few weeks have gone to bed hungry?
At Castleberry School, students whose families are at the poverty level or slightly above qualify for the free lunch program. We talked with some of those kids with their parents' permission.
Who can tell me what it's like to feel hungry?
It's hard, you can't sleep, you just wait, you just go to sleep for 5 minutes and you wake up again and your stomach hurts and you're thinking, I can't sleep, I'm gonna try and sleep, but you can't because your stomach's hurting, and it's because it doesn't have any food in it.
And it's like a black hole, and sometimes when I don't eat, my stomach, you can hear it's growling, you can hear it.
Usually we eat macaroni, or we drink water or tea.
My mom will sometimes make food and then she won't have enough, so at night we'll just eat cereal or something. Other times my parents will fight about money because they don't have enough money to pay the food.
We have to sometimes take food from a church. It's hard because my grandmother's also out of work and we usually get some food from her.
It's kind of embarrassing because the next day you go to school asking kids if they want this or if they want that. If they have cereal and they haven't opened it yet, you go ask them if they want their cereal.
After that report aired, viewers responded, and the viewers responded with a very loud voice. Millions of dollars were donated to the kids in that story. All of the parents that were in that story and both parts that we did were offered jobs. They were all offered homes. Truckloads of food were driven into Central Florida. And people were just shocked that this could be happening in their own backyard. You know, I often get, people don't want to hear about sad news. It's sad, I don't want to hear it. News is all depressing, I don't want to know. I tend to disagree, and this story was one of those things that made me realize that. People do want to know. They want to know about starving kids in their backyard. They want to know that the kid sitting next to their kid in their classroom doesn't have enough food to eat that day. And so I truly do believe that people will react if you let them hear the voices of children like those. But as I said, you know, people really react to stories that are in their own backyard, and there are more stories all around the world that aren't being heard, and that's where we also come in as journalists. You know, so many people can't believe that genocides can be happening and that millions and millions of people are being killed all around the world and no one's knowing about it. But guess what? It's happening. Genocides are happening all over the world and no one knows about it. Rape, killings, murder, refugees crossing borders and lands that you don't know about, and no one knows about it. And our job in some small way is to make sure that those people are being seen, that someone does know what's happening. I've always been told that the harder a story is to do, the more important it is. And there was no story that was harder than the one that I just came off the heels of in Jordan. We took a trek from hell, from Jordan to the Syrian border, and it was probably worth every minute of it. We started at 7 a.m. with a convoy from our hotel. We had really, really high spirits at that time of the morning, and we started our journey, vehicles packed, camera gear ready to go, cameramen ready to go. They had a mission, we knew what we needed to do. And so our convoy went, and we had one stop, and in that next stop, we met with all of the people from the UNHCR. So our convoy of 4 vehicles went to 7 vehicles. It started to get bigger and bigger. We then took those 7 vehicles, and then we met up with the Jordanian military. We were given wonderful hospitality, fed a beautiful meal, and we then had a Jordanian border guard export. Yes, it's a long title, I never could get it right. So the Jordanian border guards escorted us up the highway in our convoy of now about 10 or 12 vehicles, and the highway soon became dirt, rock, sand. It was like we didn't know what happened. We turned left and we just started driving on sand. And we just couldn't believe how just it changed in a matter of seconds. So as we're driving, you know, we're starting to go, okay, all right, we're about 4 hours into the journey and this is getting kind of scary. And a tire blows. And the tire blows and we think, okay, this isn't that bad. We're gonna be able to make it. So we continue on. So what we have to do is we have to leave this vehicle behind. We take all of our camera gear, we put it into another vehicle. I take all of my cameramen, I put them in another vehicle, I leave that driver in that car, and I say, we'll be back. And he's like, okay. And we leave that car in the middle of the desert, and we keep going on because all of the other parts of our convoy have just raced ahead of us. So now, getting a little worried, not completely worried, but a little worried. So we keep going, and we keep going, and we keep going. And you couldn't see anything in front of you. I mean, the sand flying up, there was no way that you could see the car that was in front of you or the car that was in front of you. You didn't even know if you were gonna ram into that car. It was just so much, it was like raining sand. And so we kept going. And now we're 7 hours into our journey, and we still haven't gotten anywhere close to a border, and we're running out of flat tires. So 9 hours later, and 5 flat tires later, we finally think, okay, what are we gonna do? And as we're starting to go, and as we're still going, you could see on the horizon dirt, just piles and piles of dirt. And next to the dirt, you could see medical trucks and army trucks and ambulances, all just waiting. just waiting for something. And we didn't know what we were going to see. I mean, we didn't know what to expect. And so all of a sudden, we park our cars, and all of our folks, all of the UN representatives and the border guards just run out of the cars, and they just start all of a sudden picking up people. They're picking up people and children and their belongings, and mothers are starting to cross over this dirt mound, and my cameramen are trying to scramble their camera gear to get themselves in place to capture footage because we just can't believe what we're seeing. You know, it's estimated that this crisis in Syria that's been going on for 3 years, every single day on the borders that we were just visiting, hundreds, if not thousands, are crossing every single day. And this is what we saw on just the one day that we were there.
Once they saw the cut in the border, they surged ahead, as though one more second in Syria would claim their children. There were more than 300, hoisting all they had in the world. Their trek varied between 5 and 10 days, through a war that tried to kill them and a desert that could finish the job.
Why did you come?
Halima brought 9 children from Aleppo, a Syrian city all but obliterated. The shelling was finally too much.
You don't know what's coming next, but you know this must be better than where you came from.
The Jordanian border guard has been welcoming refugees for more than 3 years on orders of the king. We asked Brigadier General Saber Mahairi what would happen if Jordan closed its borders. They would die in Syria, he told us. Once over the border, the refugees are passed to the UN Refugee Agency, where Andrew Harper is in charge.
This is happening every day. Every day we're getting hundreds of people, sometimes up to 1,000 people, fleeing the violence, fleeing the deprivation in Syria and coming across into Jordan.
What kind of shape are they in when they come at the end of this journey?
It's horrific, and we're seeing like children coming across now without any shoes. Often they've only got one pair of clothes. Some of them are just wearing their pajamas because when their places were bombed, they had nothing to grab to leave.
They climb aboard to be trucked into an uncertain future in a UN refugee camp. At least 600,000 have come before them. We usually think of borders as separating nations. Not here. The berm that marks this border is a ribbon of sand that binds the Kingdom of Jordan tightly to the death throes of Iraq and Syria.
The day after we were at that exact location, barrel bombs were dropped on a refugee camp on the Syrian side, killing at least 20 people. And those were women and children, most of them. I just want to make sure I get these stats right, so I'm going to read this for you. The ongoing wars along Jordan's borders are moving record numbers of refugees not seen since World War II. Jordan has a population of 8 million people, and of those 8 million, 2 million are refugees. While we were there, we visited a refugee camp that is filled to capacity. There's no more room. And it's become Jordan's 4th largest city. The United States has contributed $1 billion to Jordan, and that's still not enough. And just yesterday, the United States also requested $500 million in aid to helping Syrian rebels. People need to see that that is happening. The United Nations just came out with another report last week, and they say that 51 million people are displaced by civil war worldwide, and that half of them are children. Half of them. While we were watching soldiers lifting families into trucks, we saw children looking out the back that were looking at the border that they had just crossed. And you could just see how terrified they were, how confused they were. They didn't understand what was happening now or what the next few hours even held for them, that they were going to get checked in and become a refugee. They probably didn't even understand what that word meant or what it means and what it's going to mean for their future. They had seen so much, but they had known so little, and it actually made me think of a very personal story. It made me think of a story of a refugee who flew her home with her 2 sisters when she was just 12 years old. She went from poor to poorer and she settled in a new country, not knowing anything or anyone. She passed many years ago, but she had 13 children, an abusive marriage, and no formal education, but she was still able to persevere. Of those 13 children, she had a daughter, her first child. This daughter, along with her siblings, was also forced to live in a refugee camp after a hurricane washed away their home. This daughter eventually made her way to the United States and then helped her mother come to the United States. She cleaned houses for the rich, navigated her way through the American immigration system, and she raised 3 children on her own. Knowing this woman's story and knowing her mother's story means everything to me, because that's my mother, that's my grandmother, and their stories are my story. Because I know their story, it's changed my life. They made it very clear that it's important to understand the voices of children like those in the back of that truck or who don't have enough food to eat. And I hope that in some way, that by taking the risk and getting a few flat tires and being hungry for a couple of hours to see that story, other people will know their story. And hopefully as a journalist, you never, ever, ever, ever make up stories. You just try and do your best to tell them, and you do damn well sure hope that the world is listening. Thank you.